One ingredient you have in your kitchen makes ants flee your garden bed in a few hours without any chemicals. But when I checked why it really works, I discovered something that changes everything in pest control. Welcome, everyone. Today we will tackle a problem known to literally anyone who has a garden, a vegetable patch, or even a few herb boxes on their balcony. I'm talking about ants, those tiny, tireless, perfectly organized creatures that can turn your beautifully kept vegetable patch into a real battlefield. And not only that, I will show you why all those classic tips circulating on the internet don't actually work the way you think they do. And then I will show you the one and only method that is cheap, natural, and works so effectively that the ants will leave your garden bed on their own within 3 days. So stay until the end because this crucial piece of information, the reason why this method fails for most people, will only appear in the second half of the video. All right, let's get started. Imagine this situation. It's May. You finally planted your lettuce, tomatoes, and peppers. You spent all of April preparing the soil, composting, and planting the beds. You bought ready-made seedlings or patiently waited for your own seeds to sprout. Everything is growing beautifully. You go out in the morning with a coffee in hand, look at the garden bed and feel a sense of satisfaction. You watch the seedlings grow a little taller every day, the stems getting stronger, and new leaves appearing. It's a beautiful feeling. You planted something and it's growing. And then one day you lift a lettuce leaf and see it. Dozens, maybe hundreds of ants running along the stems, the leaves, in the soil around the roots. They move in perfect rows like a miniature army that knows exactly where it's going and what it's doing. And worse, you notice that aphids have appeared on the underside of the leaves. Tiny green or black specks that suck the sap from your plants. The leaves start to curl and turn yellow. The plants look weakened and tired. And here we come to something that many gardeners completely overlook. Not only do ants not attack these aphids, they actually farm them there. They literally farm them like we do cows. Because aphids secrete a sweet honeydew that ants love. What's more, ants carry aphids to new healthy plants to get even more of this treat. It's a perfect symbiotic arrangement for the ants and aphids. Great for them, but disastrous for your garden. Absolutely every allotment holder and gardener knows this scenario. And it's frustrating because you're trying to grow healthy food without chemicals. You want to do things naturally, and here you have an army of insects undermining all your efforts. And it literally undermines them, because ants build huge underground colonies beneath the beds, disrupting the root systems of your plants. And now comes the moment when most people reach for chemicals. You buy some granules at the garden center, sprinkle them on the bed, and hope the problem disappears. But what really happens? First, these granules cost money. One package is an expense of around 30 to 50 PLN, and it's only enough for one bed. Second, these chemicals go into the soil, the same soil from which your tomatoes, cucumbers, and lettuce will later grow. Third, and most importantly, such chemicals usually only kill the ants you see on the surface. But the colony is underground. The queen sits safely deep down, producing thousands of eggs a day. And a week later, you have exactly the same problem on your bed as before. So chemicals are out. I think we can agree on that, right? Here we are looking for natural, cheap, and truly effective solutions. And that's exactly why I spent the last few weeks testing various methods so I could show you the only one that makes sense. But before we get to it, we first need to deal with one important issue, namely all those tips circulating on the internet that don't work in practice. Or more accurately, they work, but not at all the way you imagine. Let's go through the three most popular ones. Tip number one, vinegar. This is probably the most widespread advice you'll find. You mix 1 part vinegar with 1 part water, pour it into a spray bottle, and spray the ants. And you know what? It actually works. If you hit an ant directly, the acetic acid will kill it. The problem is that you will only kill those specific ants you happen to see. And how many are on the surface? 10, 20, 50. Meanwhile, there are tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands in the colony. Besides, vinegar evaporates very quickly in the sun. After an hour or two at most, its effect disappears, and the ants that come after it no longer smell any vinegar in that spot. So what do? They simply come back. Vinegar is therefore like putting out a fire one flame at a time. Technically, it works, but practically, you will only solve a fraction of the problem. And there is one more thing that hardly anyone mentions. Vinegar is acidic, and when you repeatedly spray your garden bed with it, you gradually acidify the soil. Most vegetables like a neutral or slightly acidic pH, but if you overdo it with vinegar, you can do as much harm as with chemicals. Especially with more sensitive plants like beans or peas, this can be a real problem. Now imagine walking around spraying your garden bed with vinegar every other day all summer long. It's not only time-consuming, but above all, pointless, because you will never definitively solve the problem this way. Ants have a huge reproductive capacity, and as long as the queen is alive, the colony is constantly rebuilding itself. Tip number 2, cinnamon. Another popular piece of advice: sprinkle cinnamon on the ant hill or on the ant trails, and they will leave because they can't stand the smell. It sounds beautiful, it's natural, smells nice, and costs pennies. So what's the catch? The catch is that cinnamon does indeed repel ants, but it doesn't kill them. And that's a fundamental difference. When you sprinkle cinnamon in one place, the ants will avoid that spot. They will simply find another route and bypass the obstacle. So you've really just moved them a little further away from one bed to another, from the tomatoes to the peppers, from the lettuce to the kohlrabi. You haven't solved the problem, you've just relocated it. And it often happens that ants displaced this way occupy an even larger area than before because they are looking for new food sources. The result can paradoxically be worse than if you had done absolutely nothing. And one more practical matter: cinnamon on a garden bed will only last until the first rain. As soon as it rains or you water the bed, the cinnamon will dissolve and soak into the soil, and the effect will disappear. You would have to sprinkle it every day, which is not only impractical, but also quite expensive if you use good ground cinnamon. And believe me, the cheapest cinnamon from a discount shop has such a weak scent that ants often completely ignore it. To get even that short-lived repellent effect, you would have to buy better Ceylon cinnamon, and that means spending a dozen or even several dozen zlotys for each application. Tip number 3, bicarbonate of soda. I've seen this advice in many videos and articles. You mix bicarbonate of soda with icing sugar in a 1-to-1 ratio. You sprinkle it on the anthill and the ants will eat it because the sugar attracts them and the soda will disrupt their digestive system. Sounds logical, right? The problem is that this really only works to a limited extent. Ants are smarter than we think. The worker ants that gather food will indeed try this mixture, but they will very quickly realize that something is wrong. And what do then? They stop bringing it back to the colony, and that is crucial. If the substance doesn't reach the queen and the larvae, you haven't solved absolutely anything. You've killed a few workers, but the colony lives on. Besides, icing sugar on a garden bed attracts other insects: wasps, flies, ants from other colonies. So instead of one problem, you might suddenly be dealing with 3. So to summarize these 3 methods: vinegar kills, but only on the surface and only temporarily. Cinnamon repels, but effectively moves the problem elsewhere. And bicarbonate of soda seems logical, but ants quickly stop spreading it. All 3 methods share a common problem. They work on the surface and don't reach the core of the colony. And if you don't reach the queen in the nursery, the colony will always renew itself. So, what really works? And here we come to the core of the whole video. And the answer might surprise you because the ingredient I'm going to talk about is something you almost certainly have somewhere at home. And if not, you can buy it at any pharmacy for a few pounds. I'm talking about boric acid, which is sold in pharmacies and chemists as a white powder. Sometimes you'll come across the name borax, although borax and boric acid are not exactly the same thing. They have slightly different chemical formulas. But for our purposes, both work very similarly. And now you might say, wait a minute, that's not from the kitchen. And you're right, it doesn't come directly from the kitchen. Although borax was historically even used to preserve food, and to this day it is added to some cleaning products. But the key is that it is a natural mineral substance, not a synthetic chemical. And that is a fundamental difference. Boric acid occurs naturally in nature. You can find it in some mineral springs, in seawater, and in volcanic areas. It's nothing artificial, nothing created in a lab. But let's get to the most important part. Why does boric acid work so effectively on ants? The whole principle is based on one brilliant property. Boric acid doesn't work immediately, and that is exactly its greatest advantage. When an ant comes into contact with boric acid, it doesn't die on the spot. Instead, it swallows it or carries it on its body and takes it back to the colony. There it shares the food with others, with more workers, with the larvae, and eventually with the queen. Ants practice something called trophallaxis, mutual feeding, during which they pass food to each other mouth to mouth. And it is through this mechanism that boric acid gradually spreads throughout the entire colony. And now comes the key effect. Boric acid disrupts the ant's digestive system gradually, slowly over the course of 1 to 3 days. An ant that has consumed it will still have time to pass the contaminated food to other members of the colony before it dies itself. And those next ones will pass it on to even more. It's like a domino effect that spreads from the edges of the colony all the way to its center, to the queen. This is, by the way, the reason why boric acid works dramatically better than any other home method. It uses the ants' own social structure against them. Their greatest strength, the ability to cooperate, share resources, and function as a collective, becomes their greatest weakness. The better organized the colony is, and the more efficiently the ants pass food to each other, the faster the poison spreads. There is something brilliant in its simplicity, and when the queen dies, the colony is finished. Without the queen, there is no reproduction, no one produces new workers, and within a few days, the entire structure collapses. The queen is the heart of the colony, the only member capable of reproduction. When she stops functioning, the whole superorganism collapses like a house of cards. And now we move on to the most important part, how to prepare it correctly and how to apply it correctly, because I really want to emphasize this. If you do it wrong, it won't work, and unfortunately, most people do it wrong. Here are the exact instructions. You need 3 things: boric acid powder, which you can buy at a pharmacy. It costs a few pounds for a package that will last you the whole season. Next, you need sugar, regular granulated sugar, and you need water. You mix 1 TSP of boric acid, 3 TSP of sugar, and add about 200 milliliters of warm water. You mix until everything dissolves and it's ready. The whole preparation takes 2 minutes. Now you take small bowls, preferably jar lids or any flat, shallow containers. You pour the solution into them, and here comes what is absolutely crucial: where to place them. You don't look for the anthill. Don't try to find the entrance to the colony and pour the solution in there. This is the mistake most people make, which I mentioned at the beginning. I'll explain why in a moment. Instead, look for the trails. Ants don't move randomly. They have strictly defined routes they walk back and forth on. You will recognize them easily. They are rows of ants walking in one direction, while others are returning. Most often, they lead from the garden bed somewhere to the edge of the garden, to a wall, to the compost bin, to a tree, and it is exactly on these trails, not on the anthill, but on the trails that you place your bowls with the solution. Why on the trails and not on the anthill? I'll explain that in a moment in the section about the crucial mistake. Now, a few more important details. Time of day: late afternoon or early evening is ideal. Why? Because ants are most active during the warmer hours of the day, but not in the peak heat. When it's 35 degrees Celsius in the shade, ants go underground. However, in the evening, when the temperature drops to a pleasant 20 to 25 degrees, they set out for food in full force. So if you set out the bowls at this time, you have the best chance they will find them quickly. Quantity: for one garden bed measuring roughly 3 by 1 meters, 2 to 3 bowls are enough. You place them along the trail at intervals of about 1 meter. Don't place the ingredient too densely. You want the ants to have time to take it and carry it away. Weather: this is important. If the forecast calls for rain, wait. Rain will dilute your solution or wash it away completely. It's best to do this during a period when the forecast predicts 2 to 3 days without precipitation. This will give the ants enough time to discover the bait, gather it, and spread it throughout the colony. And one more thing, don't combine this with other methods. If you simultaneously spray vinegar or sprinkle cinnamon, it will deter the ants from the places where you put the bait. And that is exactly the opposite effect of what you want. You want the ants to find this bait, not to avoid it. And speaking of finding valuable information, If this video is useful to you and you want more similar tips on chemical-free gardening, click the subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. I'm preparing plenty of practical guides for you, so it's really worth sticking around. And now back to the ants. We're getting to the part you've been waiting for since the beginning. The mistake most gardeners don't know about, and this is exactly the reason why so many people claim that natural ant methods don't work. The mistake is simple, but fatal in its consequences. People pour the ingredients straight onto the anthill. Sounds logical, right? You have an ant problem, you find the anthill, you pour poison there. Done. Except this is exactly where the trap lies. When you pour anything, whether it's boric acid, bicarbonate of soda, or any other substance directly onto the entrance of an anthill, the ants immediately register it as a threat. And what do? They close that entrance. They simply collapse it, bury it, and open a new one a few feet away. An anthill always has many entrances and exits, and ants are masters of adaptation. When you close one entrance, they have a new one a few hours later. And worse, if the ants sense a dangerous substance near the anthill, they increase their vigilance. The workers going out for food will be more cautious. They will avoid anything unfamiliar. And that means that even if you later place the bait on the trails, the chance they will take it decreases significantly. So paradoxically, by trying to hit the anthill directly, you achieve exactly the opposite result. The ants barricade themselves, become more cautious, and your bait goes to waste. That's why it's so important to work with the trails, not the anthill. On the trail, the ant is in food gathering mode. It's looking for food. It is programmed to collect anything sweet or nutritious and bring it back to the colony. When it finds your bait on the trail, a small bowl with a sweet solution, it doesn't treat it as a threat. It treats it as a food source. And that is exactly the point. What's more, ants on a trail communicate with others using pheromones. When one ant finds a food source, it leaves a pheromone trail behind, which attracts more and more ants to that source. So your bait, thanks to the ant's own behavior, spreads more effectively than you could ever do it yourself. And there is one more aspect that is rarely talked about. An anthill can be deep, even several meters down. The queen sits deep underground, protected by layers of tunnels and chambers. Even if you poured a liter of solution straight into the anthill, the probability that it would reach the queen is minimal. Ants have an extensive drainage and ventilation system in the anthill. They will usually drain away any liquids that get inside before they can soak to the appropriate depth. Meanwhile, when the bait is on the trail, the ants themselves voluntarily and actively carry it exactly where you need it, deep into the colony, straight to the queen and the larvae. You don't have to look for anything, dig anything, or pour anything into holes. You let the ants do the work for you. And you know what the most beautiful part of this is? This principle works not only on ants in a garden bed, but on practically every species of ant you encounter in the garden. Whether it's the common black ants or the larger species that build mounds in the lawn, the mechanism is always the same. Trophallaxis, sharing food, and the gradual spread of the substance throughout the colony. Now I'd like to pause for a moment and share a personal experience with you. I tried this method myself for the first time 3 years ago, when ants completely took over my raised strawberry bed. It was mid-June, the strawberries were just starting to ripen, and I discovered that half the fruit was damaged. The ants were chewing holes in them, and the fruit was rotting. On top of that, the strawberry leaves were completely covered with aphids, which the ants were diligently tending to. I had previously tried cinnamon, I had tried vinegar, I even used commercial granules in one spot, and none of it helped in the long run. The ants always came back. Always. Sometimes the very next day, sometimes after a week, but they came back every time. I was starting to feel like I couldn't do anything about it, and that I would just have to give up on that bed. But then I came across information about boric acid and told myself I'd give it a try. And when I first used the boric acid bait on the trails, the result honestly surprised me. On the morning of the second day, I saw that ant activity around the bait had clearly increased. That's a good sign. It means they discovered it and are carrying it to the colony. I admit I panicked for a moment because it seemed like the situation was getting worse. But then I realized that this is exactly how it's supposed to look. The ants come for the bait and distribute it. On the third day, the activity dropped sharply, and by the fourth day, the bed was practically peaceful. A few stray ants wandering aimlessly, no organized columns, no trails. And the aphids, which the ants had previously protected, became easy prey for 7-spot ladybirds and lacewings, which immediately appeared on the bed without their guardians. That year, I finally harvested beautiful, healthy strawberries, and since then, I've used this method every time ants appear on a garden bed. This brings me to one important point I'd like to emphasize. Ants in themselves are not pests. In fact, they play an important role in the ecosystem. They aerate the soil, break down organic matter, and are part of the food chain. The problem only arises when their colony settles directly in your garden bed and starts farming aphids there. Then, from a beneficial insect, they become a nuisance that needs to be resolved. And that is exactly why the bait method is so elegant. You don't interfere with the entire ecosystem of the garden. You target specifically the colony that is causing you problems. Ants from other parts of the garden, which don't bother you and are doing useful work there, are not affected. If I had to choose the single most important thing I've learned through years of gardening, it would be this. The best gardener is not the one who poisons everything that moves. The best gardener is the one who understands how nature works and learns to cooperate with it. And this method is exactly about that. You don't use brute force. You don't use poisons that kill everything around. You use the ants' natural behavior, their own system of gathering and distributing food, and turn it against them. But let's get back to practical matters. Let's say you set out the bait, waited 3 days, and the ants still haven't disappeared. What now? First, don't panic. Sometimes it takes a day or two longer, especially if the colony is really large. Huge colonies can number up to 500,000 individuals, and there the substance needs more time to spread everywhere. Second, check the bait. If the bowls have dried out, top up the solution. On hot days, water evaporates faster, and if the bait is dry, the ants lose interest in it. Third, check if you place the bowls in the right spot. Are they actually on the trail the ants are walking on, or did you put them somewhere off to the side? Observe the ants' movement and adjust the position of the bowls. And fourth, and this is something people often forget, make sure you didn't use too strong a solution. Paradoxically, this mistake is just as common as pouring it on the anthill. When you add too much boric acid, the bait starts killing the ants too quickly, and that is a problem. Why? Because an ant that dies on the trail won't have time to carry the bait to the colony, and other ants that see dead comrades around the bowl will start avoiding it. Nature is simply smarter than we think. That's why this ratio is so important. 1 TSP of boric acid to 3 TSP of sugar, no more. This concentration is low enough for the ant to survive long enough to carry the bait to the queen, but high enough to ultimately and reliably eliminate it. Now let's look at what happens after those 3 days when everything goes as it should. Have you ever tried to imagine what an ant hill looks like from the inside when the colony collapses? It's a fascinating process, although from the ants' point of view, it's obviously tragic. First, the workers that directly consume the bait die. Then those that receive contaminated food from them through trophallaxis die. Gradually, the number of ants capable of caring for the larvae and the queen decreases. The larvae stop being fed and begin to die off. Finally, the queen dies too, because there is no one to feed her. The whole process takes roughly 2 to 5 days, depending on the size of the colony. With smaller colonies numbering, say, 10,000 to 20,000 individuals, it goes faster, 2 to 3 days. With large colonies of hundreds of thousands of ants, it can take up to a week. On the surface, you will recognize this when the organized rows of ants on the trails disappear. Instead, you will only see single individuals moving chaotically without a clear purpose. These are the last survivors who have lost contact with the colony. Over the next few days, they will disappear too. And now for the pleasant part. What happens to the aphids? The aphids, which the ants previously protected, suddenly lose their defenders, and nature takes care of them on its own. 7-spot ladybirds, lacewings, hoverflies, these are all natural enemies of aphids. But as long as there were ants on the bed actively chasing these predators away, the aphids were safe. When the ants disappear, the natural enemies return and reduce the aphid population to a minimum within a few days. So in effect, you solve two problems with one move. You get rid of the ants and the aphids, and you do it without any synthetic chemicals. Let's summarize the whole process in simple steps now so you can easily remember it. Step 1, you prepare the bait. 1 teaspoon of boric acid, 3 teaspoons of sugar, 200 milliliters of warm water. Mix, done. Step 2, you find the ant trails on the garden bed. You don't look for the ant hill, you look for rows of ants. You place the bowls with the solution directly on these trails at intervals of roughly 3 after step 3. You wait and don't combine methods. No vinegar, no cinnamon, no additional interference. Let the ants carry the bait to the colony themselves. You should see the results within 3 days. For larger colonies, just wait 5 to 7 days and then enjoy an ant-free and aphid-free garden bed. Now for a few bonus tips to help you prevent ants from returning to your garden bed. Tip 1, mulching. If you mulch your beds, ants are much less likely to build a colony there. Mulch retains moisture in the soil, and ants prefer a dry environment for their nests. A 2 to 4 inch layer of straw, hay, or wood chips, for example, can significantly reduce the attractiveness of your beds to ants. Tip 2, companion planting. Ants dislike certain plants: lavender, mint, basil, thyme. These are all herbs whose strong scent naturally repels ants. If you plant these herbs on the edges of your beds or amongst other crops, you will create a natural barrier that makes life difficult for ants. Tip 3, regular inspection. Once a week, walk around your garden and look for new ant trails. The earlier you catch the problem, the easier it is to solve. A small fresh colony with a few thousand individuals reacts to the bait much faster than an established colony that has been there all season. Besides, a small colony hasn't yet had the time to infest your plants with aphids on such a large scale, so the damage will be minimal. Prevention is always better than putting out fires. Tip 4, soil care. Healthy living soil full of earthworms and microorganisms is less attractive to ants than compacted, dry, poor soil. Compost, organic fertilizers, green manures, all these contribute to making your soil an environment where ants won't want to settle. Ants need soil for their nests that they can easily dig through, and that holds its shape. Loose soil rich in organic matter is less stable for them, so they prefer to choose another location. Tip 5, and this is something that is almost never talked about. Watering. Ants build nests in dry soil. If you water your garden bed regularly, you maintain a moisture level that doesn't suit ants. Of course, don't water more than your plants need. Overwatering is also a problem, but if you notice dry cracked soil in your bed, that's an invitation for ants. Mulching combined with regular watering creates an environment that is significantly less attractive to ants. And one more additional tip: if you have fruit trees where you observe ants climbing up the trunk to the aphids on the leaves, try putting a sticky band around the trunk. It's a wide band of special sticky paper that you wrap around the trunk. Ants are unable to cross it, and the aphids on the tree are left unprotected. However, this is not a substitute for the bait method. It's a supplement that specifically protects trees. Have you ever wondered how much money gardeners spend annually on chemical pest control products? If I had to guess, I'd say the average Polish garden plot consumes several hundred and sometimes even over 1,000 PLN a year on various sprays, granules, and chemicals. And yet many of these problems can be solved with simple, cheap, natural methods. The entire solution we are talking about today costs you less than 15 PLN. A package of boric acid costs around 5 to 10 PLN and will last for a whole season, maybe even 2. You have sugar at home, water comes from the tap, and the effect is more effective than expensive commercial products. But that is exactly the philosophy of this approach. You don't have to spend a lot of money for your garden to thrive. You just need to understand how nature works and work with it, not against it. Let me now briefly answer a few questions that come up most often regarding this topic. Question: does this also work on ants in a flat or house? Yes, the principle is exactly the same. Indoors, it works even better because ants have limited space and their trails are usually very clear along skirting boards, around windows, or in the kitchen by the sink. You place the small dishes along these routes and proceed exactly the same way as in the garden. The only difference is that indoors, You must be especially careful if you have small children or pets. Place the bait dish behind furniture or under a cabinet in places where a child or pet cannot reach it. And indoors, I definitely recommend using a jar lid placed upside down because it's stable and won't tip over. Question: can I use dry powder instead of a solution? You can, but the solution works better. Dry powder is harder for ants to transport to the colony. Besides, the wind blows it away more easily and rain washes it off. A sweet sugar solution is much more attractive and natural to ants. It matches their preference for liquid food sources. Question: what if I have several ant hills in my garden? Proceed gradually. Start with the one that causes you the most problems. Once you deal with it, move on to the next one. Don't try to tackle all the ant hills at once. You will need more dishes, more solution, and monitoring will be harder. It's better to solve one problem properly than to spread yourself thin across 5 fronts. Question: is boric acid legal? Yes, in Poland it is freely available and legal. You can buy it in a pharmacy over the counter. It is not classified as a pesticide if you use it in a domestic setting in small quantities. However, if you run a larger horticultural farm or operate on a large area, I recommend checking current regulations as rules can change. Question: can I leave the bait in the garden bed permanently as a preventative measure? I don't recommend that. Use the bait purposefully when you have a problem. Leaving the bait in the bed long-term can unnecessarily affect ants that aren't bothering you and serve a useful ecological function. Besides, the solution in the dish dries out over time, gets dirty, and loses its effectiveness. Now, I'd like to address a few more safety issues because it's important that you know what you're working with. Boric acid in the right concentration is relatively safe for humans. It is used in eye drops, contact lens solutions, and cosmetics, but that doesn't mean you can eat it by the spoonful. Be sensible when working with it. Don't mix it with bare hands if you have sensitive skin, and above all, store it out of the reach of children and pets. As for the garden bed, the concentration we use in the bait is very low. We are talking about 1 TSP dissolved in 200 milliliters of water. That's such a small amount that it has no measurable impact on the soil, the plants, or the vegetables you will harvest from that bed. But to be safe, place the dishes on the edge of the bed, not directly between the plants. And after the operation is complete, meaning after 5 to 7 days, remove the dishes from the bed. And one more important note: boric acid is toxic to bees. This is something you must keep in mind. If you have flowering plants in your garden that bees visit, place the dishes so that bees cannot access them. An ideal solution is to cover the dish with, for example, an inverted large flower pot in which you drill small holes at the bottom, large enough for ants but too small for bees. This way, you will protect pollinators whilst ensuring the bait remains accessible to ants. I would now like to put this whole topic into a broader context. Ants are fascinating creatures. Their social organization is one of the most complex in the animal kingdom. Each colony functions like a superorganism. A single ant possesses practically no individual intelligence, but the colony as a whole exhibits incredibly sophisticated behaviors. They can build complex underground structures with temperature regulation and ventilation. They can organize logistical chains over distances that, in proportion to their size, correspond to human journeys of hundreds of miles. They can wage wars, forge truces, farm fungi, and hold other insects captive. Did you know that ants have existed on Earth for about 130 million years? They survived the extinction of the dinosaurs, ice ages, and massive climate changes. They are incredibly adaptable and extremely resilient. There are an estimated 10 quadrillion of them living worldwide. That's a number we can't even begin to imagine, and their combined biomass is roughly equal to the combined biomass of all humans on the planet. They are some of the most successful organisms in the history of life on Earth. And yet, when this amazing civilization starts destroying your tomatoes, you have to remove it from that garden bed. And that is perfectly fine. Gardening is about balance, about how to share space with nature whilst extracting what you need from it. This doesn't mean declaring war on ants throughout your entire garden. It means consciously and purposefully protecting your garden bed. Whilst ants in other parts of the garden continue their useful work, And finally, I'd like to share with you one personal conclusion that has matured in me through years of working with the soil. Nature is not your enemy, it is your partner. And the best gardeners are those who have learned this. Ants aren't bad, aphids aren't bad, they are organisms doing what they were programmed to do. And your job as a gardener is to find balance, protect your crops, and at the same time respect the nature around you. I want you to walk away from this video with an understanding, not just a recipe, an understanding of how ants function, why they do what they do, and how you can use their own behavior to protect your garden bed. Because when you understand the principle, you can apply it in any situation, not just the specific one I talked about today. And that is the most valuable thing you can gain. Not just instructions, but understanding. Because a gardener who understands nature is always more effective than a gardener who blindly follows recipes. To wrap up, a quick summary of the whole video. First, ants in a garden bed are a problem mainly because they farm aphids, disturb roots, and weaken plants. Chemicals are expensive, harmful, and only solve the surface of the problem. Second, classic tips like vinegar, cinnamon, and bicarbonate of soda don't work long-term because they don't reach the core of the colony. Third, the boric acid method works because it exploits the natural behavior of ants. The slow action gives them time to carry the tainted food all the way to the queen. Fourth, a key mistake is pouring it straight onto the anthill. The right place for the bait is the trails. Fifth, the correct concentration is 1 TSP of boric acid to 3 TSP of sugar in 200 ml of water. And sixth, once the ants are removed, nature will take care of the aphids itself. Natural predators will return to the bed and reduce the aphid population. In the next episode, I will show you how to get rid of slugs without beer and without poison. Take care, and wishing you much success in your garden beds. See you next time. If this story has changed the way you look at the tiny inhabitants of your garden, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are uncovering the natural history and secrets that have been hidden for too long. Let's cultivate a better future together. The next treasure trove of knowledge will be open soon.